Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to day 5 of CareerConnect at home in Washington State. My name is Hannah DeBoard, and I'm a process engineer for Bristol Myers Squibb, otherwise known as BMS. I wanted to first introduce you to the colleagues that I have joining me today. We have a scientist for Bristol Myers Squibb, Vanessa Hasla, on the line. We also have Jacob Garcia, who is a medical director for BMS, and also Matthew Harms, who is the director of commercial strategy with us today. I did want to point out that these are 4 very broad departments that we are representing today, but within each of our departments, there are hundreds of different job opportunities that require unique skill sets. BMS, a little bit about BMS. We are a global biopharmaceutical company, and our mission is to discover, develop, and deliver medicines to help patients with various diseases all around the world. But here in Seattle, we have over 1,000 employees, mostly centered at our research facility in South Lake Union and also our manufacturing plant in Bothell. And just a note, just to make the connection, you might also hear us refer to it as Juno Therapeutics. And that is because the technology or the therapy that we're going to talk about today originated at the Seattle-based company Juno. Those who live in this Seattle area might have heard of this before. And so I just wanted to make the connection that Juno now is owned by Bristol Myers Squibb. Also, lastly, just one final note before I jump into the details. We did set aside 10 minutes at the end to answer as many questions as we could. So there's an Instagram link, or you can use Instagram at CareerConnect at home to message your questions, and then they will get funneled to us, and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end. Okay, so let's dive into the problem that we're trying to solve here at BMS in Seattle. Our problem is that we're trying to safely and effectively treat cancer. And I'm sure that almost everyone on the line has been impacted or has a family member that has been impacted by cancer in some form or another. And cancer, especially blood-based cancers like leukemia and lymphoma, which we are currently focused on curing right now in Seattle, they can be really hard to treat because cancer cells can disguise themselves to look and act like normal cells in the body. And so although our body has immune cells, which attack and fight invaders just like cancer, the problem is that our immune cells cannot keep up with the rate at which cancer spreads, especially because they have trouble sometimes identifying them. So here in Seattle, we are working on developing CAR T cell therapies or medicine, which uses the body's own immune cells that already know how to kill cancer cells and modify them so that they are better equipped to identify the cancer cells and keep up with the rate that it spreads. To make this unique medicine, we take the patient's own blood, and that blood is flown all the way to our manufacturing plant in Bothell. We modify those T cells so that they have something called a chimeric antigen receptor, which I'm hoping Jacob can help me explain in a little bit. And then we also grow up these cells so that there are a lot of them, and then we send those cells back to the patient where they're administered by their doctor, just like any other type of medicine that you could see in the hospital. We also call this a living therapy because once the cells are infused into the patient, they continue to grow and live in the body. So it's a really, really cool therapy, and it's really unique. Jake, can you tell us a little bit more about CAR T cells?
Sure, hoping folks can hear me on the line. Thanks, Hannah, for the description and the lead-in. I hope you guys can see the slide there. So again, my name is Jacob Garcia. I'm a medical director at Bristol Myers Squibb, which means in very simple terms, I'm a doctor, like you might think of, who takes care of patients. I did take care of patients before, and now I help work with patients who are getting this CAR T cell medicine. And so I'm gonna walk you through how it's made at a pretty high level. So if a patient has cancer and they're not responding to the medicine that they've had before, what we do is we collect their blood, which you can see on the slide on the far left, and that's in a process called leukapheresis, which is kind of fancy, but basically just means we collect their blood in a bag and we send it to the manufacturing plant where we do some testing and some manipulation of the cells, so one of the components that are in the blood that normally would help fight infections. And we can actually put in DNA. If you've taken some biology classes, you might know what DNA is, but we can introduce portions of DNA that will actually allow that person's own white blood cells to then put a protein on the outside of those cells. And if we give them back to the person, which you see in the far right of the slide, it's called an infusion, we can actually, those cells will actually grab onto or attack the cancer cells, hopefully, and then get rid of them like they're an infection, essentially. And so that's a special process that was developed actually here in Seattle for this particular medicine. And that's why Juno and Bristol Myers Squibb, the cellular portion of that group is centered here in Seattle. And that's really how it works at a pretty high level.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And then Matt, I think there was one more slide that we wanted to show a little bit more about what the CAR looks like on the surface of the cell. It kind of works as a hook.
I can help explain that too, now that we have this slide up. So this is a little bit more detailed picture of what that looks like. And for those of you who might not be familiar with cells or looking at things in the blood, there's sort of a picture of a cell on the left, which you can see is more or less just a sphere in 3 dimensions. In 2 dimensions as a flat picture, it's just a circle with some proteins or kind of spikes on the outside of it. And the CAR is then introduced to the cell and then will eventually pop out on the outside of the cell, which is what you're seeing there and kind of in the middle of the slide. And what each of those little cups does is then pictured on the right. It'll actually grab onto a cancer cell by recognizing a very specific protein that's expressed on the cancer cell, and then allows the T cell, which is pictured on the lower portion of that image, to actually attack the cancer cell and kill it. So that's how this medicine works. It's a very specialized way of medicine to work against cancer.
Thanks, Jacob. I know everyone's really interested in hearing a little bit more about what we do specifically for our jobs at the company. I thought we would start with Vanessa, and she can walk us through what it's like to be a scientist at BMS.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Vanessa Hassela. I'm currently a Scientist 1 at Bristol Myers Squibb, and you might be wondering what it means to be a Scientist 1. Like, why does she have a 1? Is there a 2? And so at our company, we have different levels of scientists. I just recently finished school, so I'm a Scientist 1. But as I do more science and gain more experience, I can move on to become a Scientist 2 and then a Senior Scientist. So in the same way that you can level up in a video game like Fortnite, you can also level up at work. I've been with this company for about 2.5 years now, which is crazy. I just feel like the time has gone by so quickly, but I've also had many opportunities to work on fun and interesting science projects. As you might be able to tell by the last comment, I think science is pretty fun. My favorite part about science is when you discover something new, and until you tell someone else what you found, it's wild to think that you're the only person really in the world who knows that discovery or bit of information. Anyway, I joined Bristol Myers Squibb because I love doing science and I want my scientific discoveries to improve human health. I think most of us probably know someone who's had cancer or may have seen the toll that cancer treatments could take on patients' bodies. And so I'm really passionate about finding new ways to fight cancer that aren't so hard on our patients. And that's why I joined Bristol Myers Squibb. So before I joined Bristol Myers Squibb, I went to school for 24 years. That's right. I went to elementary school, middle school, high school, 4-year college, and then finally I went to graduate school to get my PhD. And I guess I'm one of those people that really likes school and learning new things. So that amount of school, although hard at times, was actually pretty fun for me. And then when it came time for me to decide where I wanted to go to college, I was awarded a scholarship to attend Arizona State University, which is located in my hometown. And nearly all of my family lived there. So I took that offer and I ran with it. And I was really curious about genes and DNA. And so I opted to study genetics. And one of the best things that I did during college was get a job in a genetics laboratory. And that's where I started to learn how to become a real scientist. After I finished college, I knew I still wanted to study more genetics, and I was offered another scholarship to work on my PhD in Seattle, Washington. And so I moved up to Seattle, And then I spent my PhD using machine learning, or what I also call fancy pants math, to predict what will happen when a mutation occurs in DNA. And then after school, I still wanted to use the skills that I'd learned to make new treatments for cancer patients, and I found that I could do that at Bristol Myers Squibb. So what does my work look like at Bristol Myers Squibb? Well, a scientist's main job is to ask and answer questions. And I guess I'm kind of a weird scientist because I don't do my work in the laboratory. Instead, I do all of my research at my computer. But nonetheless, I can still ask and answer questions that ultimately get us closer to answering our big question, which, as a reminder, was how do we discover new ways using our body's own immune cells to recognize and fight cancer. So, for example, I often investigate images of cancer to better understand it. One question I have is what types of immune cells usually hang out near cancer cells? And so to answer this question, I'm looking at images of cancer tissue, and I'm looking to see how close the T cells are to the cancer. Another question that I'm trying to answer is what lets cancer grow and spread? So to answer this question, I look at the DNA of cancer and I try to find mutations that are only found in growing and spreading cancer. And once we identify what mutations are causing cancer, we have a better chance of using the immune system to fight the cancer for us. And then when I do come up with a new idea, I usually team up with scientists that do experiments with cells or mice in the laboratory. So for example, I might have a hypothesis that a new drug will kill cancer cells, and I want to try out my idea in a test tube. I can go to my laboratory friend, they can test out my idea, and then we can analyze the data together to see if my hypothesis was either supported or refuted. And there are many talented and brilliant scientists at Bristol Myers Squibb. However, we can't do all of our science alone. Sometimes we ask scientists from all over the world with interesting new technologies and ideas to help us learn more about cancer. So for example, we sometimes work with scientists from the University of Washington to learn more about how to use immune cells to fight cancer. And after the scientific discovery team finds a new way to treat cancer with our own immune system, we need help from our manufacturing team to help make our medicines. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, I'm a process engineer for Bristol Myers Squibb, but there are many different types of process engineers that work for our company. So I work at the manufacturing site. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and then also a little bit about the manufacturing site as well. So I majored in bioengineering at Montana State University. And growing up, like Vanessa, I loved math and science. I was very competitive. So kind of in my head, coming from a really small town in Montana, medical school seemed like a really good option. And it wasn't until high school when I was in physics, my physics teacher explained that there's this field called engineering where your job is to just solve math and science problems every day. So I thought that was really cool, and combined with my interest in medicine, bioengineering was just a great field for me. And I actually wasn't even aware of all of the different industry that you can take this degree until I came out to Seattle and was exposed to some of the biotech in the area and heard about Juno Therapeutics, which is the company that I started at. So at the manufacturing site, there are three main goals. The first is to produce or manufacture our therapy or medicine. That is obviously very important. This is where we receive the blood from the patient, actually do the modification to the T cells, as Vanessa mentioned earlier. And we do those all in our controlled lab spaces. And then that same material is packaged up. But before it can be shipped to the patient for infusion, it needs to undergo a series of tests to make sure that, number one, it's safe for the patient. That's obviously very important. And two, that it's effective, or that it'll work on killing their cancer when it's infused. So once all of the tests are completed for that drug product, the third main goal of our manufacturing site is to be able to release that product. And since we make medicine for human use, there's a lot of documentation that takes place and throughout the manufacturing process and all the way through testing. And all of that documentation has to be reviewed and assessed to make sure that the product was made as expected and there were no mistakes in generating that product. Once all that documentation has been reviewed, we're able to release the product to the patient, which is always an exciting day. At the site, I'm in a support group called Process Engineering. There are multiple support groups to help those three main goals, but a little bit more about what I do at the company and how I help manufacturing meet our goals is I support the manufacturing floor when issues come up. So the manufacturing staff uses a set of instruction or procedures to create our drug product. And you can think of this as like using a recipe to make a batch of cookies. And so we want to make sure that no matter who is in the lab and creating the drug product, that they turn out the same every single time. So our steps are very, very detailed because we want it to be produced the same way every single time. And so if something happens that they can't follow the next set of instructions because something happened that was outside of the manufacturing control, they call up my team and I have to work with them to understand what's going on, what's the problem, what does it look like? And I have to use my technical knowledge on how our process works to be able to understand what our options are for moving forward. Because as we mentioned before, our drug product is very unique because we receive blood from one patient, which we use to create the drug product for that same patient. So if something happens during the manufacturing process, we need to make sure how we can continue to advance the process and what instruction we need to provide the manufacturing staff to be able to produce that drug product. The second key piece of my job is improving the manufacturing process. So we work very closely with Vanessa's teams, like Vanessa's, I should say. There are multiple teams at BMS that are doing research and studies to improve our manufacturing process. And so once a question has been answered, like Vanessa was talking about on how we can make our process better or how we can make our medicine better, that technology is transferred to me. And it's my job to understand that to understand the process change on a technical level so that I can work with people at the site and pull together a cross-functional team to make that change to our process. So it's a lot of working one-on-one with people, explaining the change to them. I love this part of my job because it lets me work with so many different people across the entire site. And we also work together on one common goal. And so we all have actions to make the process change. And then at the end, it all comes together when we implement that change. That is what I love about what I do. It's just a little bit of a peek into manufacturing. But I was hoping that Jake could then talk about clinical testing as a whole and what he does as a medical director for BMS.
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. Once Vanessa's done all of her work with her colleagues in the lab and figured out kind of the best way that these cells can be used to help patients, and Hannah and her team have optimized the process to actually make the cells and figure out how to do that in a safe and efficient way, our team in the clinical testing and sort of research and development side really looks at how do we get those cells then safely to patients and see if they work in the way that we think they would work in real human beings. They might have been tested in animals and in labs before, and we need to make sure that ultimately they would be safe and effective for people with cancer. So that's kind of more or less what I would do. My role is as a senior medical director at the company at Bristol Myers Squibb. And just to give you a sense of what that means, so when I was in high school, I think the common theme here, we all liked math and science. In fact, I realized I was just drinking tea out of my fractal mug that I've had since college, which trust me, it was a long time ago. So always loved math and science. I ended up going to a college called Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California, which is outside of Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, in California. So that took 4 years. I was a chemistry major and minored in biology and also music. And then thought about doing a PhD, ended up deciding that I wanted to pursue a career in medicine and get my medical degree as kind of a way to tie in my ability and really joy of working with people directly, but also my love of math and science. So that's kind of how those came together. So I went to the University of California, San Diego, and got my MD. And then once you get that degree, you could go and practice, or you could work at a company with an MD, but I actually wanted to take care of patients for a while. So I did something called a residency in pediatrics. So I'm actually a pediatrician, that you guys have probably all had your pediatrician. So I took care of kids with cancer, ultimately. I did a pediatric residency, and I did something called a fellowship afterwards, that where you train further in the cancer portion of pediatric care. And so all of that together took 14 years. So I started when I was 17 and I finished when I was 31. And then I got a job. So that it gives you a sense of how long that whole process takes. I did work with patients and I was a doctor to many children with cancer for about 8 years. And then I took a job with a company to help move science forward. I was working with individual patients. And now at Bristol Myers Squibb, what I get to do is work with scientists like you're seeing on this call to really get things out of the lab and into the hands of physicians all over the world, really, who can use that science to help patients. And that's kind of what my job is now. So it's not typical of what you might think a doctor would do, but that's really my job now. So once these products have been developed, what we do is design experiments. So you probably have worked on experiments in your high school or junior high science classes. We design experiments called clinical trials where we can test these medicines in patients and do that safely in a way that everybody agrees, scientists and the government agrees would be a safe way to do that. And then we work with doctors all over really the country and the world to get patients who would like to be as a part of our experiment on the trial. So it's patients who are really out of normal options for their treatment and really don't have a lot of other chances to fight their cancer. So they'll enroll on our clinical trial or our experiment, and then we agree with their doctor and them to provide the medicine for them, and hopefully it works for them. And that's how we test it on volunteers, people that give us their consent to do that. And then what we do is collect information on that experience. How did they do? Did they respond? Did they get really sick? So that information, which is called data, we take that data, and on a day-to-day basis, I'll meet with different teams to analyze that data to see what it looks like. If it looks like it's favorable, that is, it's working in patients and it's safe. We have to balance those two things all the time. Then it can maybe move forward. And if we get agreement from other scientists in the community, as well as government agencies, like you probably heard of the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration, those kind of organizations are the ones that agree, yes, your medicine works, and now doctors can prescribe it. And I and people that I work with those organizations to make sure that doctors can prescribe medicines to you, like when you have an ear infection and that kind of thing. All those medicines that you've probably taken before for a sore throat or a cough, those things went through this same process, and that's really what we're doing, but it's just much more complicated with these CAR T-cell medicines. So once they get approval, we have to get information about it out to prescribers and get that product out to patients who might need it. And that's really where the commercialization or Matt's teams takes over. So I'm going to let him take the next part of the discussion.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Matt Harms. I work for the commercial organization with originally Juno Therapeutics, now Bristol Myers Squibb. I think Jake set it up pretty well. By and large, really, at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that these controlled experiments that Jake's organization works with, once we hopefully get FDA and government approvals, that we're really able to bring those therapies to the masses. This process that you heard about, starting with Vanessa's group all the way through Hannah's and then eventually through Jake's, that can take 5 or 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars that we wind up investing to bring these therapies. But those clinical trials, a lot of times, can only enroll maybe 100, 200 patients in them prior to getting government approvals. When we think about the number of patients worldwide that have cancer, tens and hundreds of thousands of individuals worldwide that are diagnosed with cancer every year, We really need organizations to help bring those therapies to the market, and to be honest, to make money off of them that would allow us to invest in generating the next versions of these therapies in the future. So our organization, the commercial organization, is really tasked with how do we bring these therapies in the hands of all the treating physicians, all the different cancer doctors around the world, to allow them to prescribe those therapies to anybody who has cancer. In terms of my background and path to winding up in the commercial organization here, I think like everyone else on this call, had a very strong interest in science and mathematics all throughout school. I went to college at a little liberal arts school in Missouri called Truman State, where I studied economics there and spent 4 years honing my critical thinking skills on the debate program there as well. After that, spent 5 years working in finance before going off to graduate school on my own as well to get my master's degree in business and strategy at the University of Michigan. The path then to lead here is, look, I could help solve business challenges anywhere. A whole bunch of different companies. Unlike the other 3 people on this call, I don't have a very strong, really in-depth background in science. All of my background is on business strategy and critical thinking. So the organization here, it feels good at the end of the day for our job to be really figuring out how we bring these cancer therapies into the hands of patients around the world. And that commercial organization really encompasses quite a few different things. We have to build a sales force, a whole team of individuals that go out and meet with physicians around the United States and around the world to help educate them on new therapies like ours that may be available, and to help get that in the hands of patients and those physicians. We work a lot with insurance companies to make sure that once a physician prescribes a therapy and says to a patient, hey, I think this is the appropriate next option for you, that they're able to afford it, and that the insurance company is able to get the therapies paid for, and then ultimately pay us for producing those cells for them. We work with a lot of government companies or government groups as well, whether that's insurance companies or regulators around the world. We'll also have responsibilities for providing and paying for these therapies. We handle a lot of the marketing and branding and advertising. What's the story of the cell therapies here? What's the reason why these therapies should be considered when you can think about all the different treatment options that are available to physicians and patients? We meet with a lot of individuals as well. We get a lot of advice from physicians and nurses, from patients and their families. We also have to work with distributors, right? The different organizations that help in the background, that once our cells are ready to be shipped from Seattle, how do we get them and all the legal and financial agreements in place to ultimately deliver those to a wide range of physicians and hospitals all around the world? And lastly, we have a really big data and analytics team in the background. They help us understand where patients are being diagnosed with our types of cancer around the world, how those patients are being treated on a week-by-week basis, and ultimately how well our therapies are performing out in the market. So by and large, the organization, sure, we're certainly tasked with generating revenue and making money for the company to invest in that next round of innovation and therapies. But really, it encompasses a lot of different groups and a lot of the different functions as we push forward to try and bring these medicines around the world. So with that, I think I'll probably hand it back to Hannah as we start thinking through some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Now that we've heard from the panel and a little bit more about what we do here at Bristol Myers Squibb, I thought I'd start out with a few of the questions that we've received. The first is, what classes should students in high school start considering taking for these roles? So I was hoping maybe Vanessa or Jacob, maybe you guys could start with this question.
Vanessa, I'll let you take it.
Sure. I guess my first thought is when it comes to high school classes, take as wide of a breadth of classes as you possibly can. You don't need to focus in on a very specific type of biology or chemistry just yet. But I think just keeping your eyes open and taking as many different types of classes as possible is my advice.
Yeah, I think I ended up taking every AP class I could that was offered. I went to a small school and there weren't always a lot. So I just wanted to know what physics was about and what chemistry was about and what biology was about. And so I just took those, but I also took history and languages because I wanted to learn those things. So I would agree with Vanessa. I think it's nice, especially in high school, take challenging classes, push yourself, but keep your options open. Don't, unless you know exactly what you want to go for, then, go for it. I wasn't really there when I was in high school, so.
Yeah. Jacob, I might pick on you again for this one, but for someone who isn't sure what they want to do, why should they pick a career in science? Or Vanessa?
I'll take a quick stab and then I'll
Okay.
let Vanessa go. I think that with a career, with a degree in science, there's so many directions you can go. I think at first I might have thought I was limiting myself in getting a chemistry degree, but that could take me really in any number of directions. You can stop with a bachelor's degree and find a number of exciting careers there. You can get a master's degree, you can get a PhD, you can get an MD, you can get both, which sounds crazy, but a lot of people have both. And so I just think there are a lot of directions you can go with your life if you get a education in science and background.
Vanessa, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a good one. Do I need a let me see. Do I need a master's degree to be a scientist and to work on cancer therapies? Matt, do you want to answer this question?
So I can obviously speak from the non-scientific and non-medical side, right? We certainly hire a lot of people that don't have master's degrees. I think that for us, what's most important is that people are really intellectually curious. We love finding people that can take a problem, find out kind of digestible steps to try and fix it, and then go out and actually execute and make that happen. So yeah, I don't think master's degrees, certainly for a lot of the business functions are a requirement by any means. Yeah.
One thing I might say, Hannah, that I noticed in Matt's career, that I went straight through schooling and Matt took a break and got a degree and worked and figured something else out probably about himself and the world and his career, and then went and got another degree. And that's, both those ways are perfectly good ways to get there. I don't think you have to kind of charge through and I'm going to get a master's degree. Maybe work for a couple of years, find out things you really love and are passionate about, and then pursue an advanced degree. And that makes a lot of sense too for a lot of people.
Yeah, and Jake, it's a good point. Like I always tell people, it's certainly one thing, especially on the types of tools and classes that we would study on the business side in college. It's one thing to think about it in a classroom, but it's an entirely other thing to go out and do it out in the real world for a real company. And that kind of experience is certainly really hyper valuable on the business side of it.
I did want to add, from a manufacturing standpoint, I did get a degree in engineering, but I actually started in the manufacturing department, and I worked with a wide variety of people with different backgrounds, all the way from high school education, philosophy majors, English majors, all the way up to engineering majors. So I thought that was a really cool way to get into the science community and learn the manufacturing process. So you didn't necessarily need the background that a bachelor's of science would give you to do that. Okay, one more question. My high school doesn't have a lot of science classes. What else could I watch or read to learn more? Does anyone want to take this one?
I can start.
Oh, and Vanessa, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think if your high school doesn't have a lot of science opportunities for you, it's almost never too early to reach out to a laboratory and ask if you can hang out and help graduate students or undergraduates do their science. I think that's a great way to get involved. As far as reading and videos go, does anyone else have any suggestions?
The one thing I was going to say, what I did, because I went to a small school and occasionally we had AP science classes, but we actually didn't have a lot. And I ended up taking classes at a local junior college in the summertime. And actually one summer I went to a bigger university that's pretty well known for science and math. So you can seek out opportunities for designed for high school students at local junior and colleges and universities that can give you a little bit more advanced experience in the sciences and math, if that's what you want to pursue.
Similar to Jacob, I grew up in a really small town and we didn't have a very large AP program when I was in high school. And we also didn't have a lot of colleges in the area that I could do that. And so don't feel like you're going to be behind when you get to college and you don't have that AP background. I mean, you'll get up to speed really quickly within your curriculum for your degree. Oh, this is a good one. Do you think we'll cure cancer in our lifetimes?
Do I get to answer that as the physician mom?
Yes.
When doctors and scientists use the word cure, it's risky, right? Because what that means to me and what I would explain to patients, your cancer is going to go away and it's going to stay away, right? It's not going to come back. And do we wait 5 years to say that or 10 years till we say that? So that's the first thing is, I think the short answer is yes, but the bigger answer is that every cancer is different. So just to think that what we're talking about right now is we're using currently in blood cancers, but there are lots of other cancers that are even more hard to treat. And so whether or not we cure other types of cancers is a big question, but I think a lot of smart people are attacking this problem from a lot of different directions at a lot of different companies and universities. And I think we're making a lot of great progress. So I'm hopeful that we will.
That's awesome. Okay, we have one final question. I think Vanessa and I will answer this one. There aren't a lot of girls in my science classes. What's it like being a woman in science? Do you want to start, Vanessa?
Would you mind starting?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. I've never been particularly intimidated being a woman in science. I have a very supportive group, and I've always felt very supportive through high school, all the way through college, and in my career today. So although I don't have any experience being a man in science, I don't feel like I am at a disadvantage at all. And I have always felt really respected and supported in what I do. So do not be intimidated if you're thinking about pursuing a career in science and thinking that you won't be taken seriously, because I have not had that experience at all.
If I may, the one thing I might say is a lot of companies, a lot of universities are very geared towards diversity and inclusion. And though you may not think there are people that look like you or who are just like you, when you get out in the world, you will see there are a lot of people who represent who you are, and you'll see yourself reflected, and maybe you're going to be the face for somebody else, when you in your future who looks up to you. And so I wouldn't let that intimidate you. And thanks, Hannah and Vanessa, for being a part of that at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll end there, but thank you all so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon. We are Bristol Myers Squibb, and I'm sure there is a way to contact us through Kinetic West if you have additional questions or want to reach out to the panel. We really had a lot of fun putting this together for you, and I just hope that you guys really enjoy your sunny weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.